Hi, this is My Keys to Music and I'm Marc La Rochelle. Thanks for joining me on this fourth and final video where we compare the Nord Stage 3 and the Nord Electro 5D keyboards in great detail. If you made it this far, give yourself a pat on the back because we did take a deep dive on the comparison of these two keyboards. And I thought it was a good thing to do because when I was researching what keyboard I wanted, I wish I had a video like this to help me. In this video, we're going to take a look mostly at the effects between the two keyboards. Luckily, there's a lot of similarities here between the two, but there's enough differences to warrant a video on it. Then we'll take a brief look at the pricing between these two keyboards. And I understand that everyone is going to get their own price from different places all over the world. And then finally, I'll give you guys a recap of the entire series. All right, without further ado, let's take a look at some of these effects. On the left side of the screen, I have the Nord Electro 5D. On the right, I have the Nord Stage 3. In general, these effects are largely the same. And the good news is that you're not going to be missing any effect, really, if you buy either keyboard. But let's talk about some of the details between the two. First, the amp and the EQ. Starting with the EQ, the Nord Electro 5 here, pictured on the left, does have the bass, the mid, and the treble. There's also a frequency option as well. Then on the Nord Stage 3, that's represented here. Although the orientation is up and down versus horizontal, it doesn't really matter. You still get the same treble, mid, and bass and frequency options there. So let's go take a look at the EQ right now. Okay, let's talk about the effects. I'm going to be using the Stage 3 as my demo keyboard for that. The effects between the two keyboards are very similar, so there's really no reason to go back and forth between the Electro effects and the Stage 3. Since the Stage 3 has a little bit more options, it'll be best for us to use that as the demo when we talk about the effects. Okay, let's take a look at the EQ. I'm going to put them all down here. Playing the low register, piano. You can hear a big difference there. Mid. There's a good example of that. Treble. Okay, you can hear that too. Okay, that's the EQ portion. Now let's talk about the amp simulation. We've got the small JC and twin. That really hasn't changed between the two keyboards. They've oriented these up and down versus down and up, but essentially you get all the same things there. And then if you want to take a look, there is the rotary speaker, which on the Nord Stage 3, the rotary speaker is dedicated and far on the left, and you can affect the organ, piano, and synth. So you choose that, and your drive is also located there as well. So it's interesting where they oriented that. It works perfectly fine. I think it's kind of good to have it separated on its own panel like that, far to the left. Here on the Electro 5, when you don't have the compressor on, drive can be invoked. And then when these two lights are illuminated, you're then in compressor mode, and that's when this knob affects compression. Just a note on how all these effects work. On the Electro 5D, you have a low and an up. So I did have a video, I think it's video 2, where I talk about the low and up and how that splits into layers and things like that. So the effects will affect one part or the other, never both. So if you split your Nord Electro 5 and you have strings on the left and piano on the right, your effects, once you invoke those effects, you've got to decide if it's going to affect the strings or the piano. It's not going to do both, with the exception of, let's say, reverb, which is universal to both parts. On the Nord Stage 3, a similar rule takes hold, and you can see it here indicated very clearly that you can make this effect against the organ, the piano, or the synth. Okay, so that's just a word about how these effects work in general. And the same goes for the EQ and so forth. Just a point to note that on the Stage 3, you do have two panels, panel A and B. And in a sense, that does give you more options to affect EQ on two things happening at the same time. For instance, you could have piano on panel A with one set of EQ, and on panel B, you could have another piano with another type of EQ, both playing simultaneously. So in a sense, the Nord Stage 3 does give you more effects and more options and more layers and things like that. But in and of itself, in a single panel, you can only have an effect on one part at a time, at least for the effects that are broken out that way. That does not apply to compressor and reverb, which are universal. Let's go take a look at some of these things in action. Amp simulation. on the stage 3, you have the LP24, low pass 24, and the high pass 24 as well. And I believe those are affected by these as well. Yeah, so I think these have a direct impact when you have the LP24 and the HP24 kicked in. Okay, and the compression, turn that on. Without it, with it, definitely suppresses the sound. You can add a fast option, which is a fast recovery. It's really kind of hard to give you an exact over-the-top example of compression, but the compressor on here affects the entire keyboard, which it doesn't on the Nord Electro. All right, now the Effect 1 area of the keyboard. The Electro 5D and the Nord Stage 3 both have similar effects. And by the way, when I say Electro 5D, I'm really talking about the entire Electro 5 family. So these are oriented a little different, but essentially they're the same. You have the rate on both, rate and rate. Notice here on this rate, you have the ability to have it slave to a master clock. So you could have the rate of the effect be a derivative of the master clock so that you can have a sequencer and control the rate of all your effects or the effects that allow for that. So that is an additional bonus that you get with the Nord Stage 3. There is no master clock on the Electro 5 to speak of. All right, so you have trem 1 and 2. Here you have one trem, pan 1, pan 2. Here you have automatic pan. Notice something very important. Here you have the amount. With this knob, you can control the overall emphasis of the effect, which you don't have an amount knob here for Effect 1. So that's, I think, a distinct advantage to the effects in the Nord Stage 3. Although at the end of the day, we're talking subtleties here, and you're still going to end up having great panning and great wah in the Electro, but you do get some additional options here in the Stage 3. All right, and then notice here on the effect, this is where you would indicate that you want to use the control pedal to control this effect. Here you don't see a control pedal, but don't be misled. You can actually morph this effect based on, the pedal, the wheel, but they're just on another part of the keyboard. All right, so that's Effect 1. Let's go take a look at that now. So I've got a simple electric piano here. It's actually a Wurlitzer 2XL. That's my sound, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this first effect on here. And we're going to first talk about the automatic pan, which is the sound going between the left and right sides of the output. And this is the rate and the amount. Be stronger, weaker, or none. All right. Tremolo, ring modulation, wah-wah, automatic wah-wah 1, which is essentially just another option. All right. So that's Effect 1. All right, Effect 2. On the Nord Electro 5, you have phase 1 and 2. You have flange, chorus 1 and 2, and vibe. Essentially the same thing with the Stage 3. You've got phase 1 and 2, flange, chord 1 and 2, or chorus 1 and 2, plus vibe. Notice here you have an option to do deep, which is more emphasis. I believe that this knob here will do the exact same thing, but in finer granularity. So that's Effect 2. Let's go take a look at that. Same Wurlitzer 2 extra large. Go ahead and turn that on. We'll start with the phase 1, then phase 2, slightly different. Flange, vibe. The rate makes a big difference on the vibe. Chorus, chorus 2. All right, delay. No Nord keyboard would be complete without delay. And in the early days, in the first Nords, there was no delay. I had the Nord Electro 2, and I really missed not having a delay on that. So you get the dry and the wet, 0 through 10, so that's the same. You get 1, 2, and 3 for your feedback options on the Nord Electro 5. Here, the feedback is a dedicated knob with 0 through 10. So there is a distinct difference and perhaps even an advantage on the Nord Stage 3 to have that feedback granularity. You do have the tap tempo here on both keyboards, so you can tap it to derive the tempo. And you do have the ping pong. One thing to note is that the Nord Stage 3 has both the tap as well as the granularity of having the tempo in a knob format, which is nice to have it right there. In order to get the granularity here, you have to click and hold the button and then move the knob, which is further to the left of the keyboard, to derive the actual tempo. So I like having the tempo button right next to the tempo here in the delay. So you have the HP, the high pass filter, low pass filter, and band pass filter. And then you have the analog mode. So those are advantages here for the delay on the Stage 3. And we'll take a look at those now. Perhaps one of my favorite effects is the delay. Okay, first I'm going to play a series of notes without delay. Now with delay. All right, and then you can just affect, you know, the depth of that, or the amount of delay you've got, the amount of feedback. And then there's filters here: low pass, high pass, band pass. And what that means is, essentially, it filters out the subsequent delay tones that you hear, either in the high, the medium, or the high, the low, or both. And then the tempo, you can tap it like this. So I'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I can adjust it this way. And then if I push analog mode, it gives me like the old tape delays where when I adjust the tempo, it'll actually, you know, bend the pitch along with that. And then I think there's something else that the analog mode does. I think it adds just a touch of distortion on the delay as well. Okay, let's talk about the reverb. On the Nord Electro 5, you have dry and wet, just like you do on the Stage 3. You do have the different room options. You have stage, stage soft, room, hall soft, and hall. Here you have room 1 and 2, stage 1, stage 2, hall 1, and hall 2. So slightly different names, but essentially you get to the same place within each. It's not exact, but at the end of the day, well, look, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the increments are slightly different. The overall effect is slightly different, but it's still reverb. It'll still get the job done. Please note that there's a bright option here, which I found very important, actually. You wouldn't think so, but it actually is, because when I was playing the Nord Electro 5, I'd had it for like 6 months prior to the Stage 3, and I really enjoyed the reverb that came out of the Electro. And when I played the reverb on the Stage 3, there was something different about it, something I didn't quite understand. It almost felt less lively, more subtle. I eventually found that there was a bright option. When I invoked the bright reverb, it felt identical to what the Nord Electro 5 had. So let's go take a look at the reverb now. Okay, now reverb. Without reverb. With reverb. Big difference there. Hall. You can add quite a bit of reverb. Or you can just have a small room. All right. Oh, and then on the reverb, you have the choice of bright or not. So it seems to make a difference when you have a lot of reverb on. This is without the bright. With the bright, it is a little bright, a little bit more high-end, a little more lively. Okay, let's look at the power the effects have on a song or a performance, just to see the impact in a very practical way. Here's a famous song without effects. Okay, now let's add some reverb and a little bit of drive, because that's what I hear, a little bit of distortion in that, possibly a little reverb. Let's start with that. I also hear chorus. Maybe a little less drive, and I also hear tremolo. For sure, the song I think is famous for the tremolo. Alright, so if you want to learn more about effects, I think the best way to do it is to briefly look at the manual. There's some nice descriptions there on how the effects work and some of the background behind that. I'm sure there's videos on YouTube too, specifically talking about the effects in great detail. The purpose of this video was just to give you a brief overview of the effects, as well as introduce you to the idea that they're very similar between the two keyboards. Just a few additional enhancements on the Stage 3. Okay, pricing. Let's go look at some pricing here. I brought you here to Sweetwater Music Instruments and Pro Audio. They've been really helpful for me. I don't have an endorsement agreement or anything like that. It's just a place that I found online that had good service, and they were able to connect me with some equipment and provide consulting along the way. So let's just use this as an example. There's, like I said earlier, there's places you could buy this stuff anywhere you need to. Let's just go Nord Stage 3. All right. So you can see here I've got 3 choices with the Nord Stage 3. I talk a lot about the choices in my part 1 of the series. So you've got the 88 key, which is, the granddaddy of them all, right around 4,500 at the time of this video. 3,500 for the compact, and somewhere in the middle, 4,199 for the HP 76 stage keyboard. That's the one I have. So that's the Stage. Let's go look at the Electro. The Electro is a slightly older keyboard. It's not as new as the Stage, but it's still a hot seller and still one of their flagships, in my opinion. You've got the Electro 5 HP, which is right around $3,000. The Nord Electro 5D 73 for $2,500, and the 5D 61 for $2,199. So that's the pricing. That gives you an idea of the differences there. Okay, let's recap. Throughout this video series, part 1 through 4, we talked about a lot of different things. We talked about the size of the keyboard, the options, the keybed, the keyboard, the ranges of the keyboards, and how many keys they had, and how that affects you perhaps as a professional musician in the gigs. Talked a lot about the specifications therein. We spent a whole video on layers and splits, essentially, and then we spent a whole nother video on the sound engines and the different comparisons between those. We also talked about the additional options and things like that, the pitch bend, the wheel. We talked a little bit about the A1 synth and how that's distinct and individual on the Nord Stage 3. Okay, just some final words on these two keyboards. First of all, no matter which one you purchase, you will be fine because they both have the essentials that make Nord Nord. Great organ, great piano, great sample capability, great effects, great performance keyboard. You won't go wrong with either of them. There are distinct advantages of the Nord Stage 3, and of course, the price goes up accordingly. The ones that come to mind for me would be the pitch bend and the modulation wheel. Those are some nice features to have and fun to play with. The A1 synth is like having a whole nother keyboard on top of that. Don't forget it comes with an arpeggiator, which can really add some fun to the performance. And the A1 synth itself is amazing. Then you have the layer and split capability and panel capability of a Stage 3, giving you a lot more options on splitting and layering, a lot more polyphony, a lot more memory, and so forth. The Stage 3 is the flagship keyboard, has all the bells and whistles, and of course, like I said, the price goes up accordingly. But either way, I wish you the best of luck in this decision. I thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the channel and or leave comments, questions, concerns, anything I might have omitted, or things that you like about this series. Thanks for watching, and good luck in your decision.